9 to 5 Mac had an exclusive leak, which is a weird one. I gotta admit, this is not what I was expecting, and it definitely got my gears turning, so if you guys like to watch me ramble, then strap yourselves in, because I've got some crazy ideas on this one. Let's begin. The exclusive leak is actually close in relation to the Pro Display XDR. 9 to 5 Mac is saying that Apple is prototyping a next generation version of this display, which Apple announced in 2019, started delivering at the end of 2019, and pretty much nothing has changed with it since then. We're coming up on the 2-year mark where they've not lowered the price, they've not updated the specs or anything. It's still just good old Pro Display. Very curious on the sales of that one, because I finally saw it in person a while back, and it was good, don't get me wrong, it just wasn't $6,000 good. I appreciate the uniform bezels and the color of those bezels, but obviously I'm very confused. I want to know why exactly Apple wants to test out having a dedicated A13 chip with neural engine in the next generation of the Pro Display XDR. And keep in mind, in this article they're suggesting that Apple is working on a cheaper standalone monitor. We're not exactly sure what the timeline on either of these screens are, so my guess is that a cheaper standalone monitor would launch with the Apple Silicon Mac Pro, maybe sometime next year, because that one will probably come down in price a bit. And when I say cheaper standalone monitor, I'm not talking about $1,000. I think in today's world we can just kiss goodbye the idea of Apple ever selling a $1,000 monitor again, but maybe closer to the $3,000 or $2,000 price point, which I'm sure it'll still be a clean, elegant looking monitor. It just won't be as insanely good with the extreme dynamic range as the Pro Display is. But what the purpose is of shipping the A13 chip, I have a few theories on. For one, a fairly logical one could be that trying to push all of these different pixels and adding all of that extra work for the GPU on the M1 chip, Apple wants a dedicated silicon inside this display to help supplement those graphics, and therefore the monitor can help kind of drive itself. That way the M1 chip and more of our Apple Silicon Macs can be focused on processing and rendering your productivity apps, and the monitor can be providing itself with most of the additional graphics power it needs. Another theory floating around is also that Apple just wants there to be another eGPU option, so that when you plug your monitor into your laptop or your Mac Mini, now it has access to more juice to help it render high-intensive tasks and just kind of give the M1 chip a little bit of a boost when you're sitting down at a desk. But personally, doesn't sound quite right to me, because I feel like the A13 chip isn't going to provide that much of a boost in terms of being an eGPU compared to the M1, which, don't get me wrong, could definitely use any boost in graphics it can get. It just doesn't feel like the A13 chip would be specifically chosen for that task. So another wishful thinking of mine is that maybe this is just an updated iMac they're prototyping, and I would love the idea of Apple kind of making a Pro Display XDR that now has Apple Silicon inside it, and it's just a standalone iMac Pro that has the extreme dynamic range, but also has the best latest generation Apple Silicon on the inside, and perhaps the A13 chip is merely a placeholder during the research and development phase so that they can figure out how to make the whole system on chip fit behind a Pro Display type design. That's probably assuming too much on my part, because I need to just give up on the whole idea of the iMac Pro and just accept that the 32-inch iMac is probably going to have white bezels and a chin, and there's no way to get around that. So I'm going to abandon that hope, because it's exactly what I want, which means Apple probably won't do it. But a more reasonable theory that I've seen floating around that actually sounds kind of cool is the idea that the A13 chip will give Apple's standalone monitor a few extra features that it didn't have before, such as AirPlay. So if it had the A13 chip, that means you could connect it to Wi-Fi and cast directly to it, separate from what it was displaying on your Mac. So if you're in a scenario where your laptop is docked with this thing and you're doing some stuff on your laptop, but maybe someone in the room wants to show some pictures or some videos on the big screen monitor, instead of casting to your Mac and taking over your laptop display and the external display, now you could just cast directly to the monitor, and it would be kind of its own separate thing. And of course, the A13 chip in neural engine could perhaps allow for features like Face ID, which this would actually be really cool in my opinion, because one of my bigger complaints of the Pro Display XDR, I get that it's meant to be a reference monitor and it's not meant to be catered towards everyday consumers, but I just feel like for $6,000, wouldn't it be nice if you could at least get a little embedded webcam, or maybe in this case a biometric, so that you could unlock your Mac via Face ID? I just look at the Pro Display XDR and I think about how thick the back end of that thing is and how relatively cheap the Face ID sensors must be relative to a $6,000 screen like that. And if it had its own neural engine, an A13 chip on the inside, Apple could have that added security built into the monitor itself. That way, Apple doesn't have to compromise on the security of the Mac and allow accessories to unlock it that are just connected over Thunderbolts. So this maybe would allow them to have little extra features like that here and there, which I definitely think would be cool if you could dock a big fancy monitor to your Mac Pro and suddenly you have Face ID to unlock your Mac whenever you sit down. And I love Face ID, so yes, please, Face ID, all the things. I don't care what the product is, slap Face ID on there. As long as it doesn't come along with the notch, I'm fine with it. And while the A13 chip is probably a little too weak for Apple to throw macOS on there, I'm sure it's feasibly possible, but it would just be ridiculous. I do think that it wouldn't be the craziest idea in the world if you're buying a really expensive monitor like this and it has the A13 chip on the inside. What if for a weird market out there, you could let it boot into tvOS mode? I'm not saying this would be the intended purpose of the device, but it's a 32-inch display. It's pretty big, and I know lots of people out there that kind of live in smaller areas and don't really need a massive TV, so this could just turn the Pro Display XDR into more of a multi-purpose device, so you can use it for a Mac accessory, of course, but simultaneously, if you want to swivel it away from your desk and have a great viewing experience for people on the couch or people who are in your office, you can boot it into tvOS mode, and now you can play Apple Arcade games, you can watch your Apple TV Plus shows with extreme dynamic range. I could see Apple pushing the services argument on this one a lot, and the games could be running natively, so not that this would be the sole purpose of making this device. It's not meant to be a TV. It's still meant to be a Mac display, but it can do a couple of extra handy Apple ecosystem supported things, and we know that tvOS is comfortable running on the A12 chip, so I'm sure it could do it on the A13 chip as well. But all of those crazy theories are not the most likely. I think what is the most common is Apple wanting their monitor and their Mac to help each other out with the graphics boost. It's possible that this next generation Pro Display could have an even higher resolution than 6K, so it's going to need all the GPU help it can to provide all of those pixels to you in an uncompressed format. But I must just say, even if that's the truth with this monitor they're testing, I kind of love the idea that when Apple is done with this whole Intel transition and we just have Apple Silicon across every single Mac, then Apple starts selling Mac accessories like this Pro Display with an A13 chip, and it can only work with Macs. Like, you cannot connect this monitor to a PC because it's only for Apple Silicon, and that's how it's able to output this high resolution, is if it's directly connected to an Apple-made device. Now, I know that's not good for our PC boys out there, but my own evil Apple sheep mind just kind of likes the idea of there being exclusive Apple Silicon accessories that's like, nope, you can't get a monitor this great on a PC because it doesn't have Apple Silicon, and you're never gonna get it. I know, it's mean, and it probably would work with PCs. It would just be at a much lower resolution, but come on. Apple knows PC people are not buying the Pro Display. That's just not happening very often, and knowing that Mini LED is actually in mass production now, and Apple is gonna start shipping it in more and more products, using the old dated modified LCD technique with the Pro Display XDR is probably gonna go away. So if they make the switch to Mini LED, they could make this monitor thinner or cheaper, or at least improved with the local dimming zones and that type of thing. So I'm very curious to see where Apple could go with this, although I must admit I'm far more interested in the cheaper monitor that's been rumored. Hopefully that comes out sometime next year. But I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are on putting an A13 chip into a Pro Display and what purpose you think that serves. Feel free to let me know. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you guys in the next one.